now Perek Yud Aleph, chapter 11, and we are on page 200, 4 lines from the top. The Alter Rebbe speaks here about a very important issue, the idea of forgiveness. And he says that because Hashem, God, is Rav L'Sloyach, and I want to point out to you what I heard from my Mashpia, Rabbi Yoel, the difference between Rav L'Sloyach and Marbe L'Sloyach. Marbe L'Sloyach means he increasingly forgives. He always is forgiving. Hashem is always forgiving. That's Marbe L'Sloyach. Rabbi Yoel points out, I think it's based on the Sikha the Rebbe, that Hashem is more than just Marbe L'Sloyach. Hashem is Rav L'Sloyach, which becomes a noun. Marbe L'Sloyach, Velvel, is an adjective, a verb or an adjective. What Hashem does is he keeps on adding forgiveness, slicha. Rav L'Sloyach is much different, it's much deeper, it's a different category. It's a noun. Who is Hashem? Who is God? Not only someone who keeps on forgiving you, he is known as the epitome of slicha, the epitome of forgiveness. What is the difference between the two? This is a wonderful deep insight that's real. The difference is, if Hashem was only Marbe L'Sloyach, guess what? There would be a difference between asking God for forgiveness the first, second, and third time and the 1,000th time. Even to Hashem. Even Hashem, who is infinite Hillel, Bli Gvul, Adam Finaitim, Ein Sof, right? Nevertheless, we know a rule in both in mathematics, especially in Chasidism and philosophy, that Ein Sof is not Ein Lo Tchila. I don't want to go into it at length, but just this is a sugya in Chasidus Chabad, in the Rashab's Maimorim especially. The difference between God from the perspective he has no end, Ein Sof, versus God as Ein Lo Tchila, he doesn't have a beginning. What's the difference? Basically, Ein Sof is still, at the end of the day, a limitation. In other words, his greatness, it consists of Ein Sof, no end. Ein Lo Tchila is much deeper. Ein Lo Tchila means he doesn't have a beginning. Ein Sof already accepts the fact that there's a beginning, and the end, there's no end. As soon as you say that there is a beginning to God, you've limited God. Yes, sir, you're a philosopher. You heard what I just said. As soon as you say Hashem is Ein Sof, you're accepting simultaneously the concept that God has a beginning, but he has no end. And if you accept that, which is what we're saying when we say Ein Sof, then ostensibly that's still a limitation in the Godhead. When you say Ein Lo Tchila, God has no beginning, meaning to say the Ein Sof part is in a sense irrelevant. It's small change. Ein Lo Tchila, he doesn't begin. What does it mean he doesn't begin? The whole concept of beginning and end is meaningless to him because he transcends it. Now, using this concept, and again, there's a lot to discuss about this in Chasidus, but just briefly, I hope I made it clear, the concept. I would say the same thing is between the concept of God being Marbe L'Sloyach, increasing to forgive, and God, which is a verb / adjective, versus God being Rav L'Sloyach, a noun. Who is God? Rav L'Sloyach. Not what God does. This is God. This is Hashem. He consists of Rav L'Sloyach. And therefore, when it comes to asking Hashem for forgiveness and getting forgiveness, at the end of the day, if God is only marbe l'sloyach, you cannot say there's a difference between the first, second, and third time and the 1,000th time. He's going to forgive you at the 1,000th time too. But the issue is, there's an iota of a difference in the Godhead, the way he feels to you the first, second, third time when he forgives you, and the 1,000th time. But if you talk about Hashem being a noun, Rav l'sloyach, the first and the 1,000th and the 1,000,000th are all the same. You know why? Because the whole calculation of 1 versus 1,000,000 is meaningless. He transcends that. He transcends numbers. He transcends conditions. Marbe l'sloyach doesn't transcend conditions. Marbe l'sloyach says there is a 1 and there's a 1,000,000. And as soon as you say that, Menashe, as soon as you say there's 1 in 1,000,000, you're conceding to a difference between a 1 and a 1,000,000. And this is, yes, Hillel, go ahead.
I'm aware there was a Jewish mathematician by the name of Cantor, George Cantor, who proposed a theory of the infinite varieties of infinity, which he called the Aleph. And this is a so I'm just reminded of that as you're speaking.
You're saying you haven't told us about his shita. What was his philosophy?
I'm not sure that there are words to describe it.
Okay.
But basically, mathematically, when you want to refer to infinity is one thing, but an infinity of infinity, so he calls it the Aleph.
Interesting. Very interesting. Velvul, Isser, are you familiar with this George Cantor? No?
The name rings a bell, but not, I don't think that I ever studied it.
Well, again, I just want to say, I don't know anything about him and his philosophy, but when we compare, our positions of philosophers and mathematicians to concepts in Chassidus, we have to be very, very careful in studying whether it is exactly that idea. It could be close to the idea, but not exactly. And to me, the best proof is Spinoza. Spinoza's position and the position of Chasidus and Jewish philosophy is so close, but yet one is heresy and one is Torah. So,
you're talking about the Hashem's, there being an iota of change in the Godhead. Are you talking about that which is like influenceable in the Godhead, like what we daven for, that we daven for a change in the Teva or something like that, as opposed to that which transcends all possibility and all limitation?
Yeah, I would say that's also incorporated, but I was talking about the result. What's the result? The result is that if you do something 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times against Hashem, and the mechila and the pardoning is not as wholesome, not as complete, if it's coming only from the marbe l'sloyach and not the rav l'sloyach.
Okay.
So the Alter Rebbe here in Igeres haTeshuva, this is a chiddush and a tremendous important point that the Alter Rebbe says Hashem is rav l'sloyach. In other words, don't sell yourself short. This is his point. I'm paraphrasing. Don't sell yourself short and relate to God when you're asking for forgiveness from the marbe l'sloyach perspective. God, Hashem, you love me, you love us so much, so you can even put up with our narishkeit, even though we did it 1,000 times. That's a beginning step. But that's not God. That's what he's saying. You're identifying in a sense with your own approach to tshuva. And when the Alter Rebbe is saying, relate to tshuva on God in God's way, not in your way. You hear that, Hillel? So that would be in relation to what you said, change teva versus transcendence. Teva is our world. So in our world, we ask once, we ask twice, and a human being, a normal person, after 5 times, he says, go somewhere, I don't want to see you. You're a liar, you don't mean it and all that. And by Hashem, he says, come back, dear, come back. I can take it, right? That's all teva. What the Alter Rebbe is teaching here in Tanya, the Igeres haTeshuva 11, is that Hashem is deeper than that. Hashem is of a different category. He's Rav L'Sloyach. So relate to him that way, and then you don't have to make the calculation in yourself. Hey, how can I ask God for forgiveness each year? He's going to speak about it soon, Yom Kippur, and Daseres Yemei Tshuva, and Klei Deshela, which is coming up in a month, and all that, right? How could you do that? I'm a chutzpinyak. I said I'm not going to sin to you, and not going to do it again. I do it over and over and over. So the Alter Rebbe says, you're right. If your understanding of Hashem's forgiveness is only marvelous loyach, you have a good point. But if you understand that Hashem is transcendent, that the word you use, which I'm substituting with the word the Rav L'Sloyach, a noun, then it's a whole different category. And there is no difference between 1 and a million. You still have to do tshuva. The fact that we still have to do tshuva, it's not like we can, okay, therefore, since God is transcendent, I can be a behemoth and Hashem will forgive me. It doesn't work that way. If he wants to forgive you, he's going to forgive you, because he can do whatever it is. But what we're saying is this, I want you to hear this word. That Alter Rebbe is saying here, that a Jew, in his approach to tshuva, should emulate God's approach in tshuva. And just as God's approach in the tshuva is, he is Rav L'Sloyach, you, the petitioner, become a Rav L'Sloyach. And how do we have that koyach? We're human beings with nature, in the natural world. The answer is because you have a neshama. So if we're coming from the neshama perspective, which is transcendent, we can be a Rav L'Sloyach. Now, this is going to be explained in the next section. Let's go. So page 200, the third line, actually, not the fifth, the third after the period.
You mean 100 kuf? Page kuf?
No, page 200. Igeres haTeshuva, page 200 on the English side. It's opposite kuf aleph. It's opposite kuf aleph. Okay? Therefore, God forgives our transgressions. B'chol shana v'shana. This is from the Rosh Hashanah davening or Yom Kippur davening. B'chol hachatoyim, and all sins. Shebesvadim be al chet, that we do confession when we say al chet on Yom Kippur. Midashana, every year we repeat it. The same things. We're davening 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 80 years. And Hashem is Mavarash Maseinu. Av shechazar v'over aleim. And although you repeated the crime, chayzer u'misvad aleim, nevertheless we are instructed to repeat and ask for confession, for forgiveness, b'yom ha'kippurim, on Yom Kippur, b'shana haba, in the upcoming year. So whatever we did this year, we're told, Yom Kippur comes, bang al chet, say al chet, have regret, do confession, v'chein lo'ila. Uv'chol shana v'shana, says the Alter Rebbe, not only do we do this repeat once a year on Yom Kippur through al chet, but throughout the year, that's why he says, v'chol shana v'shana lav dafka, not just once a year. It isn't necessarily just once a year. Ela kamay came b'chol yoyim, every day. V'yoyim, gimel pamim. Every day we say 3 times, Baruch Ato Hashem, Chana Marbe L'Shloach, U'Kamayim Razal, Tefillah Keneged Tmidim Tiknu. Right? Chazal say that in place of the sacrifices, which was brought for the various reasons, including tshuva, for our carbon chatos, for the sin offering, for forgiveness for sin, in lieu of that, because we don't have sacrifices since the temple was destroyed, we have what's called tefillah, prayer. V'tomid shel shacha, the morning tumid, the morning sacrifice. Hayemechaper al aveiros halayla. It forgave a person for the sins that he did at night. V'tomid shel bein arbayim, in the afternoon sacrifice, the mincha al shel yoyim, it forgave the person for the daily sacrifices during the day. V'chei midi yoyim b'yoyim lo'olam. And so every single day, we daven shachris and mincha. In the time of the Beis Hamikdash, we had the carbon tomchei shachar and arbayim. In lieu of that, we have shachris and mincha. So the Alter Rebbe says, he's saying over here, not only is it a repeat request once a year, Moshe Myers on Yom Kippur, God forgive us, but every single day, twice a day, we're asking for tshuva for the sins of the night and the sins of the day, vis-a-vis the prayers of shachris and mincha. Seemingly hypocritical. Ella. Why? So this is a rhetorical question. Yes, sir. So why, the Alter Rebbe is asking himself, why do we point out Yom Kippur? It's not just Yom Kippur. The issue of repetition, of repetitive sins, is a daily thing. So why make a big deal about Yom Kippur? So he answers, Ella, Yom Kippur forgives for the real heavy sins. The carbon tomid yoini that was brought every day, both in the morning and in the afternoon, it forgives just for the violation, for the not doing positive commandments. It doesn't forgive for the heavy averis. For that, you need Yom Kippur, as we learned in the opening chapter of Igeres haTeshuva, quoting the Mishnah in Yuma. And today we don't have sacrifices. We have prayer, tefillah. So tefillah b'zman hazeh, matshuva kanal, together with tshuva, forgives a person for what? During the daily tefillah, it forgives for our not doing the mitzvahs, the positive commands we're supposed to do, and Yom Kippur forgives for the avedas chamuras. Now the Alter Rebbe asks another question himself, one that's pretty obvious. Wait a minute, he says. The fact that you repeat the same sin over and over and over, and yes, you're telling me God is not only Marbe L'Shloach, but He's Rav L'Shloach, as we explained before at length. It would seem as though you've concocted a plan. You know what the plan is? I will sin, and then I'll do tshuva. God is Rav L'Shloach. He's going to forgive me. Velvel. So this concept, Alter Rebbe says it beautifully in a line in a moment, that the tshuva becomes an aid to the sin. The purpose of tshuva is just the opposite. And what's going on here is you're relying on tshuva. So if so, tshuva becomes an aid to the avera. How could that be? Let's look inside now. Says the Alter Rebbe, this repetitive request for tshuva is not considered what the Gemara says is sinful and not acceptable, which is echte, I'll have a merry time, I'll live it up, and then I'll go and bang al chait, and I'll cry, and I'll give tzedakah, and I go my merry way. Ah, God, you forgave me, but I was able to really enjoy the taiva and all of that. Says the Alter Rebbe, it is not so. And he's going to tell us soon when it is so. But why is this not so? Look what he says further. Ki hainu dafke, when is it considered echte v'oshuv, which is not acceptable? Shebeshas hachet, it's when, during the time of the sin, you were able to conquer your inclination from doing the indulgence, the aveir, the sin. You rely in your heart on the tshuva. I can control myself, but hey, why do I have to control myself? Let me indulge and enjoy, and afterwards I'll do tshuva. But really, if I really pushed myself, I could control myself. Look, that's what I said before. Since in this scenario, the tshuva helps him, goremes loy. Actually, it's more than help, causes him to sin. That's very harsh words. The tshuva causes him to sin because he could have controlled himself. But he said, no, I'm going to rely on the tshuva, and therefore the tshuva actually is an aid and causes him to sin. The Gemara says, Ema speaking. Then we don't grant him tshuva. You can't have your, what's the expression? You can't have your cake and eat it too. You know what I mean? You can't have it both ways, my friend. Now here is another bombshell line of the Alter Rebbe, because he loves us so much. He says Hashem loves us so much. Even if you rely on the tshuva to forgive your sin, and therefore the tshuva actually causes your sin, and you're such an outcast, ein maspikin daf daike. What's the language of the Chazal? Hillel. Ein maspikin. You know what ein maspikin means? We don't give a first opportunity. But guess what? Avol. Look, next words. Avol. Im dochak v'nischazik. If you forced yourself and you overpowered v'nisgaber al yitzroi, and at the end you overcame your yetzer, your inclination, v'osa tshuva, says the Alter Rebbe, mikablin tshuvasai. And it's a Gemara, it's not his chiddush. The Gemara says, echte v'oshuv ein maspikin, dochak v'nischazik maspikin. That's a Gemara. The Alter Rebbe explains the Gemara. In other words, you know what the Gemara is saying? This is it's an awesome thought. That if a Jew relies on his tshuva so that he can sin and enjoy and indulge in all that, but nevertheless controls his yetzer hara once he already started to sin and had relied on his tshuva, that means he pushed himself through the door. Mekablin tshuvasai. And we have many stories like that in Chazal and in Chasidism and in things where people pushed themselves in. And you weren't supposed to be here, but once you're in, you're in. Frankly, it's a philosophy that I understand and sometimes live with. You know, they tell you, don't do this, don't go here, right? And you go anyway, and you jump in, you got in. Once you get in, you get in. You know, so to begin with, to rely on that is not acceptable, says the Alter Rebbe. V'af, look at his words, v'af gam zois ein maspikin daike. This tshuva that's not acceptable is the tshuva that the Chazal say ein maspikin. We don't, to begin with, give you an opportunity. But if you shove yourself in, you're in. We have to. It's b'di'evet, but it's but you're in. At the end of the day, you're in. And in life, by the way, this is very important. They tell you, don't come here, right? So someone could be a goody-goody. Don't come here. I don't come here, right? Then there are those that are not goody-goodies, and they come anyway. A story, I just make it very fast. The Rebbe Marash. There's someone, I told you about the book, The Shochet, that just came out, second volume's coming out. It's of the life of Pinya Goldenstein, who was born in 1840s, 50s, whatever, and he writes his memoirs. So he tells of a story in 1869, 1872, one of those years. he was out somewhere. He went away. He left his wife, who was pregnant at the time, and he was looking for parnasa. No, I'm sorry. He decided he wants to go to the Rebbe Marash. He was a chassid of the Tzemach Tzedek, and he wants to go to the Rebbe Marash. Anyway, he comes there, and the Rebbe, I think it was Wednesday, Thursday night, he goes in to see the Rebbe. The Rebbe says, Shalom Aleichem, gives him a bracha and says, please go back home. He says, Rebbe, you know what it meant in those days to walk to a Rebbe 2-3 weeks, and with a chariot. He says, Rebbe, I just came here. Let me stay for Shabbos. I can hear your Maimah Chasidis, to sing with the Chasidim, to daven with you and the Chasidim in Lubavitch. This happened in Lubavitch. The Rebbe Marash doesn't answer him. But he had told him to go back. He stayed for Shabbos. He went back to his host in Lubavitch, and the guy, whoever he was, he says, the Rebbe says that, but, he didn't really mean it. He just got here. He stays. He has a great Shabbos, uplifting Shabbos. The Rebbe sees him and even doesn't say a negative word to him. The guy was dochak, that's my point. The Rebbe told him to leave. He didn't listen. He pushed himself in and he stayed for Shabbos. The Rebbe didn't say anything again to him, wished him well on Sunday. He goes back. He comes back, whenever he comes back to his city, I forget now the name of the city. His wife had the baby by now, I think, and she tells him there was a group of 2-3 people from such and such city who came last Wednesday when you were out of town by the Rebbe, and they were looking for a sheikhet. And they came to give you a job, and they didn't have parnasa. And they said, oh well, you're not home, we have to go to someone else, and you lost the job. That's the story. He writes the story himself. This is 150 to 175 years ago. It's an incredible book. It's Baruch Hashem now out in English. You have to get it and read it, because it gives you an insight into life in the Shtetlach, in Ukraine, Russia, and those 175 years ago. So many other things, many other beautiful things. My daughters have read the first book. They couldn't put it down. So what's the point? Dochak v'nichnas. He got to see the Rebbe. Now, sometimes, other things can happen. You lost your job. If you would have listened to Rebbe Marash, the Rebbe Marash obviously saw something, felt something, that you have to go back, because if he would have went back, he would have met those people that came to give him the job. So the Rebbe Marash obviously had something in mind. But that's too late. But from his perspective, Dochak, I want to make this clear. He doesn't write this. From his perspective, I would argue he would probably say it was more worthy me being by the Rebbe for Shabbos with Chasidim than losing my job, my opportunity to be a sheikhet. And that's what a chassid is. That's really the difference between a chassid and a non-chassid. A chassid values Chasidim, Chasidis, and Rebbe more than parnasa. I mean, that's not that you shouldn't look for parnasa, but at the end of the day, I would argue that if he was a real chassid, I would say that that's what he would say. But regardless, he pushed himself in. So there is a concept called dochak v'nichnas. Let me go a little further. What about us? All this is about someone who has a mind while he's sinning. He could have controlled himself. We who ask every day, Hashem, please forgive us. We preface by requesting the bracha before Slach Lonu is V'achizirenu b'tshuva shleima lefanecha. Make us return to you with complete tshuva. What does that mean? Says the Alter Rebbe. Dahainu shelei noshuv eid lekisla. Yaini, the bracha before Slach Lonu is about tshuva. That means we shouldn't return to our bad ways. In other words, we're not playing around. We're first doing tshuva. We're first doing tshuva. That's the order of the brachas is demonstrative of how we're approaching Hashem. First, you do tshuva, hakazareinu b'tshuva shlema, and only afterwards it's slach lanu. We're saying to Hashem, we will not return to our sin. On Yom Kippur, we request, may it be your will, Hashem, that I won't sin anymore. So the Rebbe says, Maspikin. In that case, come in. You got another chance. It's not echte v'oshuv. It's only echte v'oshuv when you could have controlled yourself and you relied on the tshuva not to control yourself. Then we have an issue of echte v'oshuv. But in a case when you couldn't control yourself, the Yetzer Hara is burning, the taivas are in front of your eyes and you can't control yourself, and yet we say, God, forgive us for this. Hashem says, for that I accept, because you had no malicious intent when you asked for tshuva. Your tshuva was pure. And he quotes the Chazal, Habol l'tayer, someone who comes to purify themselves after a transgression, Messiah noisoi. Hashem helps it. Says the Alter Rebbe, the language in the Chazal is Habol daike, specifically someone who comes. Miyad shebo, immediately he comes. V'ila zois, gam aslicha v'mechila miyad. And because he immediately comes to God and says, Hashem, please forgive me. I didn't want to do it, but I couldn't control myself. Hashem says, if that's the case, I'm granting you mechila immediately. Okay, tomorrow we'll finish this chapter, Mitzvah. Have a great day, everyone. A good Chodesh. Everyone should have a good Chodesh. Menachemov. We comfort God. Hashem will bring the comfort to us vis-a-vis the rebuilding of the temple by us being menachem Him, by us comforting Him. Omen Ken Yirotz. Take care, guys. Take care. Have a great day. Good Chodesh.
Thank you.
You're welcome.